Before you look at anything else, let your eyes rise to the very top of the painting. A heavy curtain has been pulled aside, almost as if someone has just stepped into the room and quietly invited us inside. It feels less like we're standing in front of a painting and more like we're peeking into a private world that was never meant to be seen. At first glance, the curtain appears ordinary. Rich fabric, deep folds, soft light falling across its surface. But don't move on just yet. Spend a few more seconds looking at it. The longer you stare, the stranger it becomes. Notice the way the light behaves. The brightest parts of the fabric don't end in sharp, clean edges. Instead, they seem to melt gently into one another. The highlights dissolve softly, creating a hazy transition that almost feels out of focus. For an object this close to us, that is a remarkably unusual choice. Normally, the closest objects inside a painting are among the sharpest. They define the foreground and immediately capture our attention. Yet Vermeer does the opposite. He allows the curtain to lose its sharpness, making it feel strangely elusive, as though our eyes are struggling to settle on it. It is such a subtle detail that many viewers pass over it completely. Art historians, however, have been fascinated by it for decades. The effect closely resembles something that photographers know very well. When light passes through a lens that hasn't reached perfect focus, bright areas begin to spread beyond their edges. Details soften, shapes blend together. The image doesn't disappear, it simply loses its crispness. Long before cameras existed, there was another device capable of creating exactly this kind of effect. It was called the camera obscura. A surprisingly simple invention, it projected the outside world onto a flat surface using nothing more than light passing through a small opening or lens. To modern eyes, it almost feels like an early camera. Although it couldn't capture photographs, it produced projected images that artists could study with extraordinary accuracy. Because of details like the curtain, many scholars believe Johannes Vermeer may have experimented with such a device while developing his paintings. No document has ever been discovered proving that he relied on one. And that uncertainty is important. The theory remains exactly that, a theory. Yet every time researchers examine this remarkable painting, they encounter another detail that seems to support the possibility. Whether Vermeer painted directly from those projected images or simply observed the fascinating behavior of light, no one can say with complete confidence. Perhaps that mystery is part of what makes his work so captivating even today. Now allow your eyes to drift downward. The change is immediate. The gentle softness of the curtain suddenly disappears. Everything below it seems to snap into perfect clarity. Every surface has been painted with astonishing precision. Every edge feels deliberate. Every texture appears carefully measured. It is almost as though we have finally reached the point where the entire image comes perfectly into focus. Standing calmly within that extraordinary clarity is a young woman dressed in brilliant blue. She immediately becomes the center of our attention. The crisp white linen around her collar has been separated thread by thread from the surrounding fabric. Deep folds flow naturally through her blue silk dress, each one catching the light with remarkable control. Nothing feels exaggerated. Nothing feels forced. Every highlight appears exactly where it should. Her face is equally convincing. There is a quiet calmness in her expression. She doesn't pose dramatically. She doesn't demand attention. Instead, she simply stands there with such convincing presence that she almost seems alive. For a brief moment, it feels entirely possible that she might turn her head and begin speaking. But this woman is not an ordinary model. She represents Cleo, the muse of history. To a modern audience, that identity may not be immediately obvious. To viewers in Vermeer's own time, however, the clues would have been unmistakable. Look carefully at her head. Resting gently upon it is a laurel wreath. Interestingly, it isn't perfectly straight. It leans ever so slightly to one side. Such a tiny irregularity might seem insignificant. Yet it gives Cleo something surprisingly rare for an allegorical figure. She feels human. Rather than appearing like a distant symbol floating outside reality, she seems like someone who has quietly stepped into the artist's studio. Now shift your attention to her hands. In one hand she carries a trumpet. In the other rests a large book. Neither object was chosen by accident. For centuries, artists relied on symbols to communicate ideas without using words. Educated viewers understood this visual language almost instantly. The trumpet announces great achievements. The book preserves them forever. Together they identify Cleo's role as the guardian of history. Many historians believe the book may even refer to the writings of Herodotus, one of the earliest historians of the ancient world. Whether that specific identification is correct remains open to debate. What is certain is that Vermeer wanted every educated viewer to recognize exactly who stood before them. Nothing inside this room appears random. Every object has a purpose. Every symbol contributes to a larger idea. During the 17th century, painters frequently consulted illustrated manuals that explained how abstract concepts like history, justice, wisdom, or faith should be represented. Instead of inventing entirely new symbols, artists selected objects that audiences already understood. Vermeer follows those traditions with extraordinary care. He doesn't overwhelm the viewer with complicated symbolism. Instead, he quietly allows each object to reveal its meaning one piece at a time. And as we begin to understand Cleo, our attention naturally shifts toward the man standing in front of her. Curiously, he never turns around. Throughout the entire painting, we see only his back. His face remains completely hidden from us. At first, that may seem like a simple compositional choice. After all, artists often paint figures from behind to create depth. But the longer you look, the more deliberate this decision begins to feel. Vermeer allows us to witness the act of painting, without ever allowing us to meet the painter himself. It is as though his identity is less important than the work taking shape before him. Even so, the figure tells us a remarkable amount without ever showing his face. He wears a dark black garment that immediately catches the eye. Long openings run across the shoulders and down the middle of the back, revealing the brilliant white linen of the shirt underneath. The contrast is striking. Against the quiet interior of the studio, the painter stands out almost like a silhouette. But something about his clothing feels strangely familiar and strangely old. By the time Vermeer painted this masterpiece, fashions had already changed. Clothes like these had disappeared from everyday life years earlier. No artist of the 17th century would normally have dressed this way while working inside a studio. So why would Vermeer choose such outdated clothing? Most historians believe it was entirely intentional. Rather than portraying the painter as an ordinary craftsman earning a living, Vermeer transforms him into something much larger. He becomes a timeless figure, a representative of artists across generations. Someone who belongs not to a single moment in history, but to the entire tradition of painting itself. Without changing a single action, Vermeer quietly elevates his status. He is no longer simply making a picture. He becomes part of history. Now let your eyes rise above him. Suspended from the ceiling is one of the largest objects in the room, a magnificent gilded chandelier. Its elaborate metalwork immediately dominates the upper part of the composition. Every curve has been painted with extraordinary care, reflecting light with subtle golden highlights. But at its highest point sits a detail that many visitors never notice: a double-headed eagle. To most modern viewers, it may seem like nothing more than decoration. For people living in Vermeer's time, however, it carried an unmistakable meaning. The eagle was the emblem of the powerful Habsburg dynasty, the royal family that ruled the Netherlands for centuries before the northern and southern provinces followed different political paths. With one small symbol, Vermeer quietly connects this peaceful artist's studio to the larger history of an entire nation. Yet the chandelier holds another mystery. Look carefully. Every candle holder is empty. Not a single candle has been lit. The object was built to fill the room with light. Instead, it remains completely dark. Once you notice that detail, it becomes impossible to ignore. The chandelier almost feels silent. It hangs above the room, beautiful but inactive, refusing to perform the very purpose for which it was created. Art historians have often paused over this curious choice because Vermeer rarely included objects without careful thought. An illuminated chandelier would suggest life, movement, and activity. A dark one creates something entirely different. It encourages us to notice absence instead of presence, to think not only about what Vermeer painted, but also about what he deliberately chose to leave out. That quiet restraint shapes the entire mood of the room. Nothing feels accidental. Everything appears measured. Everything appears intentional. Now allow your eyes to move downward once again. Between the painter and Cleo stands a simple wooden table. Resting quietly upon it is a small plaster mask. Compared with the magnificent blue dress, the glittering chandelier, and the enormous wall map behind them, the mask is easy to overlook. Yet its meaning would have been immediately understood by many 17th century viewers. In artistic tradition, a mask often symbolized imitation. It reminded artists that painting begins by observing the visible world. Rather than inventing reality from nothing, the painter studies nature before recreating it through skill and imagination. Seen in that light, the mask quietly comments on everything happening around it. As the artist carefully records Cleo on his canvas, the discarded mask reminds us that painting itself is an act of representation. It says nothing, yet somehow, it speaks volumes. Behind both figures hangs another object that immediately commands attention. Covering almost a third of the back wall is an enormous map. This is not an imaginary decoration added to balance the composition. It is a remarkably faithful reproduction of a real printed map produced in 1636 by the famous Dutch cartographer Clees Janszoon Visser. Vermeer copied it with astonishing accuracy. The borders, the lettering, even the tiny panoramic city views running around its edges. Historians have compared these miniature skylines with surviving copies of the original print and found that Vermeer reproduced them with extraordinary care. His attention was not limited to the map's design. He also painted its age. Notice the warm amber color spreading across the paper. Look at the gentle sag between the supporting wooden rods. Observe the subtle wrinkles formed by years of hanging. These are not decorative touches. They make the map feel real. It is no longer simply an object painted on a wall. It becomes an object with its own history, its own past, and perhaps its own story to tell. The map itself is fascinating, but what makes it truly remarkable isn't what it shows. It's when it shows it. One of the easiest details to miss is also one of the most important. By the time Johannes Vermeer painted this scene, the map hanging behind Cleo was already around 40 years old. In other words, it no longer represented the world outside his window. Instead, it preserved a version of the Netherlands that had already disappeared. To understand why that matters, we need to step back for a moment. The map depicts the 17 provinces, the historic territories that once formed the Low Countries before war and politics permanently changed their borders. But in 1581, everything changed. The northern provinces declared their independence from Spanish rule, eventually becoming the Dutch Republic. That was the country Vermeer himself lived in. Yet the map behind him doesn't show that new political reality. It looks backward, not forward. To a 17th century viewer, that difference would have been immediately obvious. This wasn't a current map hanging on the wall simply because it looked attractive. It was already a historical object. Almost like walking into someone's office today and finding a large map that still shows the Soviet Union. You instantly understand that you're looking at the past rather than the present. And suddenly, another connection begins to emerge. Standing in front of that outdated map is Cleo, a muse of history. The more you think about it, the less accidental that pairing becomes. History stands before history. The artist isn't simply painting a woman. He's painting memory itself. Look a little closer. Another small detail begins to appear. Running straight through the center of the map is a vertical fold. At first, it seems completely ordinary. Large paper maps were folded, rolled, and stored for years before being hung on walls. Naturally, they developed creases over time. Vermeer could easily have ignored it. Most painters probably would have. Instead, he painted the fold with exactly the same patience he gave every other surface in the room. The wrinkle isn't simplified. It isn't hidden. It becomes part of the painting. That tiny decision has generated decades of discussion among historians. Some researchers have noticed something rather intriguing. The crease runs remarkably close to the historical division between the northern and southern provinces. A very separation that transformed the political landscape of the Netherlands. Was that deliberate? Did Vermeer intentionally allow the fold to echo one of the greatest political divisions in Dutch history? Or is it simply a coincidence? No one knows for certain. Many scholars believe the crease is nothing more than the natural result of an old map that had been folded for years. Others argue that an artist as careful as Vermeer rarely left anything to chance. Both interpretations remain possible, and perhaps that uncertainty is exactly what makes the painting so endlessly fascinating. The deeper we look, the more questions begin to appear. Throughout this room, Vermeer demonstrates an almost unbelievable level of patience. The softly blurred curtain, the aged paper, the rich folds of blue silk, the worn surface of the map. Every object has been observed with extraordinary care. Nothing feels rushed. Nothing feels decorative. Everything appears to have earned its place. By now, a pattern is beginning to emerge. Vermeer wasn't simply arranging beautiful objects inside a quiet studio. He was constructing an idea. Every symbol, every texture, every carefully measured detail contributes to something larger than itself. The room slowly transforms into more than an artist's workplace. It becomes a meditation on history, on memory, and on the enduring power of painting to preserve both. And yet, one final detail remains hidden. It's so small that many visitors pass the painting without ever noticing it. But once you see it, you'll never be able to unsee it. And that tiny discovery may reveal more about Vermeer's extraordinary working methods than any symbol or object inside the room. The more you study this remarkable painting, the more you begin to realize that Vermeer left almost nothing to chance. Even the room itself seems carefully constructed. Look closely at the point where all the perspective lines appear to meet. It happens just beside Cleo's hand. Today, if you examine the painting carefully, you'll still find something extraordinary there. A tiny pinhole. It's so small that most visitors never notice it. Yet that tiny mark may reveal exactly how Vermeer built the entire composition. Many art historians believe he placed a small pin into the canvas before he began painting. A string could then be attached to it and stretched toward different parts of the room, allowing every major line to radiate from a single fixed point. It was an incredibly simple method, yet it produced astonishing accuracy. Instead of estimating perspective by eye, Vermeer could carefully organize the entire space with mathematical precision. Perhaps that's why the studio feels so convincing. Nothing appears distorted. Nothing feels forced. Every wall, every chair, every piece of furniture sits exactly where our eyes expect it to be. The room doesn't merely look realistic. It feels believable. That same patience defined Vermeer's entire career. Unlike many painters who produce dozens of works every year, Vermeer painted at an extraordinarily slow pace. Throughout his lifetime, he completed only about 35 paintings. Some years he may have finished just 2 or 3. Every canvas demanded months of careful observation. Every surface required endless refinement. For Vermeer, speed was never the goal. Perfection was. Ironically, painting wasn't even his primary source of income. In the Dutch city of Delft, Vermeer managed an inn that he inherited from his father. That business helped support his growing family while he devoted countless hours to painting. Even then, money was always a struggle. When Vermeer died in 1675, he left behind his wife, 11 children, and enormous debts. Creditors quickly arrived to recover what they were owed. Many of his paintings had already been sold during his lifetime simply to keep the household running. Yet one painting followed a very different path. The work you've been looking at today. His wife desperately tried to keep it away from the creditors. That decision has fascinated historians ever since. Why this painting? Why not another? Did she believe it was his greatest achievement? His most personal statement? Or perhaps she simply knew how much it had meant to him? No one can answer that question with certainty. Eventually, however, even this masterpiece had to be surrendered as part of the family's debts. It disappeared into private collections, and over time, Vermeer's own name slowly disappeared with it. Today, Johannes Vermeer is celebrated as one of history's greatest painters. But that wasn't always true. After his death, his reputation faded surprisingly quickly. For nearly a century, many people barely remembered his name. His paintings quietly passed from one owner to another without attracting much attention. Some weren't even recognized as his work. When this painting resurfaced during the early 19th century, something astonishing had happened. Someone had added a forged signature. The painting was no longer believed to be the work of Johannes Vermeer. Instead, it was attributed to Pieter de Hooch. At the time, that actually made the painting more valuable. De Hooch enjoyed a far stronger reputation than the largely forgotten Vermeer. Attaching his name dramatically increased the painting's worth. It also showed just how completely Vermeer had vanished from public memory. Fortunately, that mistake didn't last forever. Eventually, careful scholars began examining the painting more closely. The style, the light, the brushwork, every detail pointed toward one conclusion. This wasn't a painting by Pieter de Hooch at all. It was unmistakably the work of Johannes Vermeer. That discovery transformed everything. Slowly, Vermeer's reputation began to recover. Painting by painting, historians reconstructed his career. The forgotten master returned to his rightful place in the history of Dutch art. And as his reputation grew, so did the value of his paintings. By the 1930s, this masterpiece had become one of the most desirable works in Europe. Its owner even attempted to sell it to the American banker Andrew Mellon. But the sale never happened. The Austrian government stepped in. Recognizing the painting as an important part of the nation's cultural heritage, officials prevented it from leaving the country. That decision would soon prove incredibly significant. Europe was moving toward one of the darkest chapters in its history. After Germany annexed Austria, Hermann Göring attempted to acquire the painting through an intermediary. Despite his enormous influence, the effort failed. The painting remained protected under Austrian law. But its story wasn't over. In November 1940, Adolf Hitler purchased it for 1.82 million Reichsmarks. The painting became part of his personal collection and was kept in Munich before later being moved into hiding as the Second World War intensified and priceless works of art were hidden from destruction. When the war finally ended, Allied forces recovered the painting. Once again, it returned home. Today, it remains safely preserved in Vienna, where millions of visitors continue to admire it. And perhaps that's the most remarkable part of its journey. This quiet painting survived forgotten authorship, forgery, financial hardship, war, dictators, and the chaos of the 20th century. Yet it still invites us into the same peaceful studio Vermeer created more than 3 centuries ago. Now think back to everything we've discovered. The softly blurred curtain that sparked debates about the camera obscura. The muse of history standing before an outdated map of a vanished nation. The tiny pinhole that may have guided the entire composition. The expensive ultramarine blue that Vermeer chose despite its extraordinary cost. The silent chandelier. The forgotten mask. The carefully aged map. Individually, each detail seems small. Together, they reveal an artist who observed the world with astonishing patience. Nothing appears hurried. Nothing feels accidental. Every object contributes to a larger conversation about history, memory, craftsmanship, and the very purpose of painting itself. Perhaps that's why Vermeer and his wife valued this work so deeply. Perhaps they understood that it represented something more than technical brilliance. It was a statement, a quiet reflection on what art could preserve long after people, kingdoms, and even nations had disappeared. Centuries later, that message still speaks to us. Every time someone stands before this masterpiece, another detail emerges. Another mystery appears. Another reason to look just a little longer. And perhaps that's Vermeer's greatest achievement. He didn't simply paint a room. He created a painting that continues to reward curiosity generation after generation. What do you think? Was Vermeer simply documenting his studio? Or was he leaving behind a carefully constructed message for future viewers to uncover? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed exploring one of history's most extraordinary paintings, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join us again as we uncover the hidden stories behind the world's greatest masterpieces. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.